We live in a world where the lines between the ancient prophecy and the current events are blurred, drawing us into a reflection on the monumental times we inhabit.
West Asia rocked by more violence in a shocking and sudden move. Rebels led by Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham launched an offensive capturing large swaths of territory, including Syria's second largest city, Aleppo. Many have been killed, thousands have been displaced. So what's triggered this sudden move? Here's a report.
The war in Syria, and especially the damage we have seen to this country, brings to mind an old prediction from the Bible in Isaiah 17:1. But before we will discuss this tremendously important prophecy in the Bible, we must understand what is actually happening in Syria. So here's the breakdown of who controls what in this country. So first, in purple, we have the territory controlled by the Assad regime. Assad was able to control most of the big cities in Syria thanks to a major support from Russia. Now, Russia didn't do it for free. They helped Assad, but they also established several military bases in Syria, giving them access to the Middle East that they didn't have before. This situation shows us the effects of the vacuum of presence, where without strong guidance or control, major turmoil and destruction can unfold, just as the ancient words predicted.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized.
Now guess what? Assad did use chemical weapons, killing hundreds of people and injuring thousands. But because Obama was not true to his words and did not act when chemical weapons were in fact used in Syria, Russia filled this void. And if you study the Tanakh and you see Russia in the Near East, your red lights should be instantly turned on. Because we see Russia's participation in a grand conflict culminating human history. So in Ezekiel 38, we read of this grand coalition against Israel. And of course, I do realize that this text has many interpretations. There are, for example, nations that we can identify like Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, but there are also those that are more mysterious. Okay, but how does it relate to Russia? After all, Russia didn't even exist in ancient Israel. Well, if you look closely, there is an interesting use of words in this paragraph. So in verse 6, we read of one of the areas from which the main attack will come. The text is very specific because it says that the armies will come from the north. The term north can mean many things. Many things are north of something, right? But to understand the essence of this verse and those words, we actually have to go to the Hebrew. And in Hebrew, besides the word used for the north, we also have a Hebrew word yarha. And this word yarha is a key modifier for this noun describing the north. Because in this context, it means the most extreme, the furthest north you can imagine. So we know that these two words describe the most extreme, the most farther north, but what is the reference point? So the book of Ezekiel was written in ancient Babylon, which is today's Iraq. And a lot of the prophecies refer to a time when the Jewish people returned to the Promised Land. So when Prophet Ezekiel writes about the far north, he is writing those words from this specific perspective. And of course, if we look at the map of the world today, the place that is the most far place to the north from Jerusalem is, of course, Russia. And you can actually draw a straight line from Jerusalem to Moscow. Isn't that something? And of course, Russia controls some of the most remote, deserted, and farthest to the north places on Earth. And that's why when Russia entered the Near East, we have just pressed a forward button on the prophetic clock. If you like so far what I shared with you, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and hitting that bell button. This really helps me as a creator. Okay, but let's go back to our map of Syria again and discuss who is controlling what in Syria. So we had the first fraction, which is the regime of Assad, which is supported by Russia, which is significant prophetically. Also, a very important ally of Assad is Iran. And if you remember our text from Ezekiel, the presence of Iran is even more obvious than the one of Russia. And that's because the Hebrew scripture mentions an ancient empire that is directly connected to Iran, Persia. So after the fall of Babylon, where the book of Ezekiel was written, another empire rises. That's Persia. Persia, which is known as the bear beast in the book of Daniel, another Hebrew prophetic book. And the administrative heart of ancient Persia was this area over here. Now please remember this sea over here. This is the Caspian Sea. So if we travel in time, this is the layout we see today. So once again, here you can see the Caspian Sea. And just below that, we have the modern country of Iran. So what I want to portray here is that Iran is directly connected to the ancient empire of Persia. And if we analyze the current situation of the Middle East, it is no secret that Iran is an arch enemy of Israel. And to understand how much Iran hates Israel, we just need to look at their support for Hezbollah and Hamas. But first, we need to talk about the two major groups of Islamic religion. So here you can see a map that I created showing you the distribution, the percentage distribution of the Shia branch of Islam, of which Iran is the main representative. So we can see that in Iran, 90 to 95% of the population is Shia. However, we can also see that there are other clusters of Shia representatives around the Middle East. So you have country like Iraq, you have a country like Azerbaijan, you have a country like Yemen, you have Syria and Lebanon. Those are the major ones. And of course you can see the approximate percentages of the population being Shia in each of those countries. And I hope this is not a secret for you that the two groups, the Shia and the Sunni, hate each other and they would kill each other because they say that they are the true religion. So the other one is fake. So just to give you an example, remember Saddam Hussein? He was a Sunni and he had a beef with Iran. And there was actually, before the war in Iraq, where Americans were involved, there was a war between Iran and Iraq. And it is estimated that from 500,000 to 1 million people died in this conflict. So it was a pretty important disagreement. Now, Saddam Hussein was eliminated because he was a dictator, but even after he was gone, the problems in Iraq did not stop. And one of the reasons is because of the population divide between the Shia and Sunni. So as you can see, the majority of the population is Shia, but there is also a big population that is Sunni. And of course, they hate each other. But the situation in Syria is even more complicated because, as you can see, the percentages of Shia in Syria are even smaller than in Iraq. However, the dictator of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, is Shia. And not only he is Shia, but he also belongs to a very small sect within the Shia religion called the Alawites. So basically you have a guy who represents 1% of the population and controls the whole country that hates him. But because he is Shia and not Sunni, he does receive support from Iran. And Iran does this by supporting the terrorist organization called Hezbollah in Syria. And it is estimated that Iran sends up to $900 million to Hezbollah each year in Syria. That's a lot of money. Okay, but if you remember, I wanted to discuss the hate of Iran towards Israel. And actually, this background information will help us understand that. So, Hezbollah was created by Iran for two main reasons. The first one we discussed, which is to keep Bashar al-Assad in Syria and to have influence over this region through this terrorist organization. But the second reason is, of course, to fight against Israel. And we have seen this in the country of Lebanon, where recently there was a big war between Israel and Lebanon. But what really shows Iran's hate towards Israel is their support of a second terrorist organization, which is called Hamas. Now, what is remarkable about this is that Hamas is not Shia, but Sunni. And normally, those two hate each other. They would never work with each other. But because it is Israel, even this hate is not as big as the hate towards Israel. So, going back to this ancient prophecy of a war, a coalition against Israel, we can easily see Iran, the heir of the ancient Persian Empire, be involved in that. And in recent days, we saw bits and pieces of how this war looked. Israel showed their determination and skill to strike Iran, even though it's thousands of kilometers away. But it's not the last word of Iran. So we are living in incredible times. Okay, so we just covered one fraction of the forces in Syria, and you can clearly see now how complicated it is politically and prophetically. But now we should move on much quicker, because we have covered a lot of fundamental knowledge, so now it will be much easier to understand things on the ground. But before I continue, I want to thank everybody who's supporting the channel. You know, a lot of the assets you see, the maps, I create myself. And of course, not only the maps, but also the 3D models, those that you can see in my other videos, those I also created. It's great fun. I really enjoy learning new things, but sometimes it is a little bit challenging. But hopefully they are helpful for you, and I can bring you closer the history of Israel, and not only the history, but modern times, and that you can better understand what this country is about. Recently, I have also started learning about 3D animation. Of course, it's not easy, but I believe it will be a nice tool for the teaching I do on this channel. And of course, for some of those programs that I use to create those videos, I need to pay. So that's why I'm very thankful to everybody who's supporting the channel. So thank you so much to everybody who's supporting the channel. If you think that my work is helpful and you would like to support this channel, the best way to do it is through Patreon. So you can see the address of the Patreon right now, and through this you can support the channel. And of course you can also become a free member of the Patreon. That way you can always be up to date what's going on with the current work I'm doing. And lastly, this is pretty fresh. Make sure to check out the online store that I created. There you will be able to purchase some of the renders, later on some of the even the 3D models I create for your own study of everything related to Israel. So make sure to check it out. Maybe you will find something interesting for you. With that out of the way, let's continue our message. Okay, so that render was an introduction to the second section of our video, the rebel forces. And this video showed you an advancement of those forces from this area over here, going towards Aleppo and Hama. And so far it was a very successful campaign because key cities and areas were taken by the rebel forces. And the advancements are ongoing, and it doesn't look like they're gonna stop unless a major power will step in. So a strategic city of Hama and the surrounding areas are almost completely controlled by the rebel forces. Just yesterday, a lot of the regime forces, Assad forces, gave up in the city of Daraa, which is on the border with Jordan and Israel. So this is a very serious situation for Israel. And frankly, the territory that the regime forces control is quite small. So of course you have Damascus, Homs, and the territory next to the Mediterranean Sea. And this territory, besides Damascus, which is of course the capital, is the most important for Syria because it gives access to the sea, the only sea that Syria has access to. But it is also strategically important because of the major bases, military bases of Russia in Tartus and Latakia. Russia is now in a little bit of a pickle because a lot of her forces are now involved in Ukraine, and that's one of the reasons why this offensive of the rebel forces happened now. And Russia did respond mainly by striking targets by planes because that's the only thing they can actually do. They simply don't have the resources. And what it seems like the rebels want to do right now is to cut off completely this part over here. And then, of course, attack Damascus. Now, Russia is really in a tight spot. Not only they have lost equipment, they lost the T-90 tanks to the rebels. They also lost a very expensive Panzer missile defense system. But they are very close to losing something they cannot lose, which is honor. You see, if Russia would be kicked out of Syria, that would be a catastrophe for Putin. So on one hand, they cannot do anything because they simply don't have enough personnel, people to fight this rebellion in an effective way. But on the other hand, they must do something because it's a serious threat to their honor. So many people are speaking again about the use of chemical weapons and other illegal types of weapons to fight people and that are illegal to use in areas where you have civilians. Okay, so we have Russia, which is weak right now, and this prompted the rebels to act right now. But there is also a second reason why they attacked Syria right now. And this reason, of course, is the recent war of Israel with Hezbollah. So Israel not only destroyed a lot of the infrastructure of Hezbollah in Lebanon, but also hit Hezbollah in Syria. And the damage to Hezbollah in Lebanon was so serious that actually Hezbollah moved some of its forces from Syria to Lebanon. So one of the forces that were to be there to keep Assad in power were suddenly removed. And that opened a way for the rebels to attack. And as you can see on the chart, the rebel forces consist of many different fractions. And of course, I will not discuss all of them. I just want to point out two major players. So the first fraction is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This is the fraction that has been advancing and is controlling Aleppo. But behind them stands even a greater player, which is Turkey. And the president of Turkey, Erdogan, is very ambitious. He said many times that Turkey is the heir of the powerful Ottoman Empire. And all those territories you see, so Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, even Saudi Arabia, were under the governance of the Ottoman Empire. And they never accepted the loss of those territories that were taken from them in World War I. So if we look again at our map of the division between Sunni and Shia, then you will clearly see that Turkey is Sunni. The majority of people in Turkey are not Shia. And that's why Turkey is against the dictator of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. And they are not happy that he is actually in power because he is a Shia representative. So obviously the Turks are not too worried that Assad is in trouble. Of course, their main enemy in Syria were the Kurds, but if the rebels can get Assad eliminated, he's not gonna be crying too much. Now, there may be an external pressure on Erdogan to stop the rebels, because Turkey is part of NATO, and there may be somebody saying to him, hey, come on, do something about it. We don't want a total escalation. So he may act. I'm not ruling this out. But Erdogan certainly is not unhappy that Assad is losing. And actually, in recent days, Assad was even pleading to Turkey to stop the rebels. So this shows you that things are getting desperate for the regime. So before we'll get to the passage from Ezekiel, back to this passage talking about this coalition against Israel, because many people believe Turkey will be one of the key players in this coalition, I just want to show you one more map for understanding the political situation. So if we look at the Middle and Near East today, we see 5 major powers. So we see Turkey, which has by far one of the biggest armies in the world, almost 500,000 active soldiers and really advanced equipment. Then we of course see Iran, which has nuclear aspirations and wants to dominate this region. Then of course we have Israel, which is again very high-tech military, and she is also aligned with the most powerful country in the world right now, which is the United States. Then of course we have Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is an interesting one because it is a country which is built on oil and it's very prosperous, and therefore it is not so much interested in military conflicts. It just wants to do trade, it just wants to make money, and we see that. And last but not least, we have Russia. And Russia did of course suffer from the war in Ukraine, but it is still a nuclear power. And what is interesting in this passage in Ezekiel, we see that not only we are told who will be part of this coalition against Israel, but we also are told who will not participate in this attack. So in verse 13, we see Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish, and they will not be part of this coalition against Israel. So the majority of commentators agree that Sheba and Dedan refer to the Saudi Arabia today, whereas the merchants of Tarshish can probably best be understood as the Western civilization. And that's because ancient Tarshish was the most Western port in biblical times. So today it would be somewhere in Spain. Okay, but let's go back to Turkey and our biblical text. So there are a few names that I want to mention here when we are discussing Turkey. So the names that we see here are Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah. Those are the names of the nations that will join this coalition against Israel. So I will just summarize with whom or with what region biblical commentators identify those names. So we have Meshech, which traditionally is understood as part of Cilicia, which is the southern part of Turkey. Then we have Tubal, which is identified as Cappadocia. Then we have Gomer, and here we have 2 suggestions. So first, the Jewish historian Josephus identifies Gomer as Galatia, but the more modern biblical historians see this as referring to Crimea. And although this territory today is controlled by Russia, it used to be controlled by Ukraine, it is still connected to Turkey because the Crimean tribes emigrated from the Crimea to Asia Minor, which is today's Turkey. And lastly, we have Togarmah, which refers to the historical Armenia, but today, of course, it's part of Turkey. And for those reasons, many believe that Turkey will be part of this coalition against Israel. And just looking at the current political map in Syria, we can see that it's very messy, that Turkey is involved in this conflict, and Turkey, of course, hates Israel. So it's very possible to imagine that this can escalate and this can lead to something even bigger. Okay, so to summarize where we stand in our analysis. So we have the territories that were controlled by Assad, the regime. We have the rebels that are supported by Turkey. And the third major power is, of course, the Kurds that are located where you see the yellow color. Now, you also have some territories controlled by the terrorists and some that are controlled by the Druze. Now, what can I tell you about the Kurds? Well, they are probably the only fraction within Syria that do not hate so much Israel. And of course, they are also under different pressures. They are against the forces of Assad, they are against the forces of the rebels, and of course, Turkey hates them. Now, for the sake of the length of this video, I will not go much into detail about the Kurds. Now, if you are interested in the Kurds, who they are, what's the situation with them, let me know in the comments and I will see how you guys are interested in that, and maybe I'll do a episode just dedicated to the Kurds, because they can be the allies of Israel in the region. But we must look at the big picture here. So we have all those nations that are against Israel. Right now, the situation in Syria is out of control and it can really escalate. Therefore, it is not unthinkable to imagine that the prophecy of the destruction of Damascus may actually happen in our time. Who will do it? Well, that's the question. It can be the rebels, because they hate Assad and they hate everything associated with him. So they may even destroy this ancient city. You know, Assad already left the city, and if Russia loses control over Syria because of those rebels, well, Russia will do something about it. And Russia recently is really well known for destroying cities. They prefer to destroy cities rather than give it away to somebody else. And the third possible scenario is that the city will be destroyed as a result of the clash between the two parties. It can take a long time or it can be quite sudden. So we have to see. The other major question is this the beginning of this massive offensive against Israel? The major players are already there in the Middle East. I didn't talk about the Southern Coalition because we focused on Syria, but there will be also nations from the south, from Africa, also joining this coalition. And this will not end well for those nations. They will gather together, they will go against Israel, but eventually they will be killed, destroyed by the God of Israel. And this is really the hope of this tiny nation of Israel. It's not the military, it's not the brilliance of the people, but the powerful God that is behind them. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope this very complicated issue, this conflict in Syria, didn't overwhelm you, and that this video helped you a little bit in understanding this very complex issue. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Also, please consider subscribing to my social media channels, especially Telegram and X. This is where I can really share much more things from Syria, images that I could never share on YouTube because I would be blocked. It's very easy. You can create an account. You can see the addresses to those channels. Make sure to sign up. I will also put them in the description of this video. You can also sign up for my email just by clicking this link. Again, it will be in the description of this video. That way you will receive an email when I publish a new video. If you like my videos, this is also a good way to stay up to date. So that's it for today. I wish you peace, because we all need peace. And the peace will come when the Mashiach will come. Shalom.